I would want us to have our software's pin in our taskbar. I want us to pin our software in our taskbar. And this is so you can be able to easily access or open your file anytime you want to use it. So how do you do that? If you go to the search icon, and I hope all of you, you're now in a position to see my screen. If you go to the search icon and you search for SPSS, you will see the IBM SPSS 3620, and it has some sort of summation. So if you look here, it has summation sign. Right click on it, right click, and then pin to taskbar. Search for SPSS. Once you see it, right click and pin to taskbar. Some of you, if you're not seeing all of them at once here, you should be seeing something like more. So you can click on more and then pin to taskbar. And what it means, you'll be able to access that software from. So this is what we mean by taskbar. If you go and open that software, and I highly recommend that you open it just once. If you open several times, of course, depending with the speed to which your computer will process that data or that information, it might take some time before you see something. And if you're not patient enough, then it means you'll be opening several instances of your software, and your computer will eventually hang. So this is the first interface you will see when you open your SPSS software. And I'll start by explaining what this first interface is all about before we jump into now the data view and variable view. So one, you have the part of open an existing data source. And I believe on your end, you should not be having anything here unless you have been using this software before. So what it means here is every file that you will use, you will be able to access them from here in history. So you just go back and access that file. You can still access tutorials and materials. So just in case you're stuck anywhere, or even if you don't want to attend these classes, you can just go back there and teach yourself SPSS. Do that by accessing the tutorial from this place. So there's a part of run the tutorial. You can type in data, and this is I don't recommend you doing that, but just for understanding purposes, if you want to copy paste your data from, let's say, a spreadsheet into SPSS, then you can click on type in data so that you see an interface to paste your details. But depending now with, or because of the different file formats, so you realize it's not always good to copy paste data, because you'll spend a lot of time trying to manage it. There are these two last parts where we have the run an existing query or create a new query. This is where now, assuming you're dealing with unstructured data, or for those guys who want to link SPSS with it, so you'll be able to write query, or you can execute query. So, but all these options are for, let's say, business intelligence analysts or people who have their data in some form of a database. So you should be familiar with some sort of database language. This is beyond the scope of this class, so I'm going to close this first interface. And this is where we should start our session. And now we have defined two terms. We know what is a variable and we know what is a case. Now let's go to the practical part of it. We have now the variable view and data view. Variable view is the interface where you will be your variables. And said variables are the questions in a questionnaire. So we will go and see what is that question in the questionnaire, and we come and have them at this interface called variable view. We have data, and data view is the interface where you code the cases. And this time you envision cases as the answers. So every answer we get, we put them at the data view. The questions, we will have them at the variable view. Let's define it. Now, we can say data entry is the process whereby you are transferring cases from a research instrument to your data view. And when I talk about research instrument, or you can sometimes call them data collection tool, we can now bring in the aspect of a questionnaire, which is the most common for data collection. We also have observation checklists, key informant interview guides. We also have focus group discussion guides. So these are different tools that I use now for collection, which now takes me back to what we're going to cover in this class. So we said we're going to cover three things: data entry, data management, and data analysis. Key them from whatever source to now our software. And in terms of data sources, we have two main sources of data. One, you can obtain data from primary sources, or you can obtain data from secondary sources. When you talk about primary, this means the researcher has a chance to interact with the respondent. So the information that you are getting them directly from the source or the respondent. And for you to get information directly from a respondent, you will need a tool. And that's why we say that tool is a questionnaire, is one of the most commonly used instruments. Apart from primary, after we cover the primary source, we'll also look at the secondary even here, and you can understand secondary sources are now information or data you are getting from archived sources or information which is stored. And if it's stored, then it means you're not directly interacting with the source or the person who was giving out that details. And of course, there's a lot of subject about secondary data. I don't want to dive into such a debate, but what I'm trying to derive at here is, we will say, oh, what if you have your data set in a website like World Bank or IMF, and now you want to analyze that. So that is the data that you don't have to go out there with your questionnaire to ask someone what was, maybe for instance, interest rate at a certain year. So you realize all you have to do is you download it from a certain website. And not just World Bank, but even if you go to Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, there are a lot of surveys which have been done before. The national housing surveys, you have the census. And if you want to analyze those kind of data, all you have to do is go to that website and download. So that is what we call secondary. And we'll also see how to handle that. So let's stick to primary, and we're going to code this questionnaire Nssf contributor. So I hope you all have the questionnaire. And in this case, first, let's understand the context of this questionnaire, because you cannot be coding something that you don't know. And results of this study to effect changes that will help that organization to play its significant role. And note that your views and response will be treated with confidentiality. And this will go a long way in assisting that organization in as far as realizing their vision is concerned. So what is happening here is you have been given maybe a task to assess an organization, and this organization needs information from their customers, because this one is a customer satisfaction survey. So that means they're going down to the field and they'll be walking around with this questionnaire. What will happen down there? They will be filling in. So if they find a respondent, they will be filling in the details in this questionnaire. This type of approach is what we call the traditional method of data collection, whereby you print questionnaires and you go to the field with those questionnaires. A very old-fashioned way of doing things, which now again we have what you call electronic way of collecting data. And you can realize that most organizations nowadays are shifting towards the use of electronic platform than just printing papers and going out there to collect data. But nonetheless, we're going to start by learning how to code manually or questionnaire that was traditionally used for data collection. And we will have to know which is the questions that you will code into your SPSS software. Okay. And I want to introduce to you another terminology or a term we call metadata, which basically informs these details that are only crucial for data collection. So once you're done with the fieldwork, there's no need, or you are not going to necessarily going to analyze them. And I'm talking about things like serial number. Of course, serial number is key when you're out there on the field. You want to know which questionnaire was from which region or who was in charge of which questionnaires. Serial numbers will come in handy there. After the fieldwork, you don't want to sit down and say, I'm analyzing serial numbers for this questionnaire. It doesn't make sense. So we're not going to code serial number in this case, and serial number will now be part of that data. We refer to them as metadata. Date of interview is the same. Name of the interviewer is the same. But if you go to section A, then you realize a question like gender, that is a question that somebody is interested or was keen to understand. They're looking forward to know how the distribution looks like. So how do we code questions? We said questions, we will code them at the variable view. What are the rules of coding a question? A variable or a question can either be coded as a, you can either assign names to represent your questions, or you can use question numbers. Let me clarify that. You're at a point whereby now you want to start coding your variables. And I said there are two ways of coding your variables. One, you assign names to these variables, 2, you use the question number to identify this variable. Why the question number? Question numbers are unique. They're just a way of identifying those variables. And if you decide to come up with names, then of course each variable should have a unique name. In this class, I will assign names to my variables. Now, the first question will be gender. So I'll go to variable view, and under name, I will write there gender. The next column is on type, and you need to know the different types of data that you will handle. And majorly there are two types of data. You can either be dealing with numerical data or string data. And that you can be able to access from here. So if you go and click towards the end of this column, a window will pop up and you can be able to choose between numeric and string. So let's understand the difference between the two. All variables that the response you get are in numbers, they will fall under the category numeric. A good example is age. Come and ask you about your age. How old are you? You say you're 20. Somebody else says they're 30, 40. Those are numbers. The answers I'm getting are numbers. That means that variable will qualify as a numeric. Simple as that. The second we say is string. Now, all the variables that answers are in alphabet, they will fall under string. I ask you your name. You say Fatun. Those are alphabetic characters. So we'll select string. Coming back to gender, of course, you know gender, the answers based on the questionnaire is either someone is a male or a female. So male and female, those are alphabetic characters. And because of that, we can say gender is a string variable. And this is so by the fact that you can either be a male or a female. Now, when you're coding gender, you need to bear in mind that the software doesn't understand English, but instead it only understands numbers. So how will your software differentiate between a male and a female, yet it doesn't know English? So we will have to introduce values, and these values will now represent the different categories for your variable. So for instance, we'll say let the value of 1 represent male, let the value of 2 represent female as numeric. Hope that is clear. Let's talk about width. The role of width is it restricts the number of characters in a response. And what it means here is, assuming you are asking people about their name, and then you come here and say, let me have a value of 3. Then what it means here is the software will accommodate or accept individual's name with up to a maximum of 3 characters. If your name is Job, the software will accept. If your name is Ivy, your software will accept. If your name is Hassan, the software will not accept because Hassan has more characters that surpasses the digit of 3. That's why we define as its role is to restrict the number of characters in a response. This will not be used so much in the quantitative analysis, but sometimes when you're working with OpenAI, you fit, or otherwise for a variable like gender, you cannot say you're 1.5 male or 1.5 female. So I will not be having decimal for variable gender. Though for width, we will work with the default of 8, but you can always have as many characters as possible if you want to. But for decimal, I've insisted, unless that variable works with decimal, then there's no point of you having decimal numbers here. And remember, this software is for social sciences. And you realize the type of variable you'll be handling will not be that of maybe things to do with decimal. But that is a relative response. So let's go to label. And label provides more information about your variable name. So for instance, if you're using question numbers to identify your variables, of course, it will be hard for somebody to come and see question 1, question 2, all the way down. So it's good you give at least more detail of what you meant by your variable. And so, because research work is not a one-person job, whereby you notice the people who are doing data entry might not be the one doing analysis. So, and the label, I will say respondent gender represent female. I will also add and click OK. On missing, there are 2 scenarios whereby you have missing cases. For learning part. When you're out there doing your fieldwork, one, there's a situation whereby you have a question and your respondent is not willing to respond. You go to University of Nairobi, for instance, ask a student for their student portal password. Not all of them will be comfortable giving you that information. Or come and ask you about your M-Pesa PIN. But I think lately people have been giving out their PIN on the same. But before, some people will not be willing to give you such kind of details. So with such a case, you will not force your response to give you the details. Instead, you will come back with a missing. So that is one of them. 2, the situation whereby when you are structuring your question or when you're coming up with your questionnaire, you anticipated that you're going to get a certain variable during data collection. But when you're actually out there you find missing, it's not there. So again, that's a second case whereby you will have missing. And on column, size of a column, by just taking your cursor in between, like, you can be able to expand the size of of your column instead of using numbers here. Alignment, by default, numerics are always aligned to the right. Strings are all aligned to the left. So every time you select from your type, so for instance, if I adjust to string and I click OK, you realize that now the alignment is left. If I go back and methodology, which is part of your proposal, you must talk about what we refer as operationalization of a variable. And in this case, you're basically trying to say, this is my variable, and this is our intent to measure it. Assuming you are trying to measure something like life satisfaction, so you come and say, hey, I want to understand life satisfaction. So my question will be, how will you answer, or how will you measure life satisfaction? So it's your job to come and tell me, this is our intent to measure life satisfaction. Another example I can use is, let's say for an economist, you say, I want to know the behavior of the economy, or I want to understand economic growth, for instance. The question that I will ask you is, how do you intend to measure economic growth? Then you'll say, oh, I will use GDP deflector, or I will use per capita income. So those kind of conversion is what you say, how do you intend to measure a variable? There are 3 measurements of variables, but you can view it in terms of actually 5. But in this class, I will discuss 3. Then I give you a chance to go and find out the rest, the 2 more. One, we have what we call nominal variables. And variables are variables that, one, they're noun, that means they're some sort of name. And that you cannot be able to rank them. Example is gender. The values that we have assigned represented. So if I enter 1 to represent female and 2 to represent, they will fall under nominal. And I said nominal have no statistical criteria. Example is, I think, question 3, the same questionnaire, on mission and core values. And if you look at the response, there's some numbers assigned to it, which means there's an order on the response. So by definition, you can say ordinal measure comprises of all the variables that have statistical criteria that warrants the ranking of the response. And a good example we will call the Likert scale question. An example is this one. This is an example of a Likert scale question. Or the ones we say strongly agree to strongly disagree. And pay attention to the use of these values, because they're not just here for decoration. But if you decide to say the person who's very dissatisfied to be issued or assigned a value of 1, and then the person who's very dissatisfied to be issued a value of 5, then that violates the principle, the criteria for ranking of ordinal measure. So what I'm saying here is the most positive person is assigned the highest weight, while the most negative person is assigned the lowest weight, and you cannot interchange that order. The last one is scale, and of course I said the two which you'll need to go and do your own background check. You'll also look at the aspect of ratios and intervals. So these are knowledge that you should have. On scale, all variables that are continuous and you can be able to extract a range, that means you have a definite maximum number and a definite minimum number, you will be able to categorize that as scale. Okay. And now scale can now be again split it into intervals and ratio. Okay? So maybe to give you a hint, I want you to go and refresh on a lot of theoretical backing so that you complement the practical that I'll be biased in this class. So let me just rush in and look at the next question. So for measure, we'll have nominal. I will go to the next question, which is, so I'll adjust decimal to 0. The question is saying what? Age in years. So I'll label it as age in 4, 20, I think it should be 20, 25 to 34, and then 35 to 44. So we're going to have all these categories now here, which is the software. So I'll say let 1 be 18 to 24. Then let the value of 2 be 25 to 34. Let the value of 3, 44 to 55. Oops. And then lastly, I think the fourth one is above 55. So actually it should be 55 and above so that it accommodates also the guys 55. So 55 and above. But the drill here is just have all the groupings with the values. And then for measure, I will have it as as ordinal. This is so because I don't have the definite maximum number. So above 55 can mean 56, 57, and so forth. So I will not be exact at in that case. Otherwise, age should be a scale. If you cannot be able to extract a range, then it will fall under ordinal. And that is why we're having it ordinal here. So for role, I hope I didn't discuss this during the first time, but role it has nothing to do with that. It's just the functionality of the software. So you can just leave it like that. The next question is on occupation. Occupation, numeric. I'll adjust decimal to 0. Then occupation is just occupation. For the groupings, I'll say either somebody is employed, self-employed, or claimant. So one is employed. I add 2 is self-employed. Then 3 is claimant. So if you also notice with this question that I'm handling, someone is meant to only choose one. So if you are male, you cannot say you're male and also select on female. You only need to settle on one. Same case applies to age. If you decide you're in group 1, you'll not be in the last group. If you're employed, you cannot also say you're also self-employed. Don't know if that makes sense. If you look at the relationship, let's code that. So I'll have relationship. And then, of course, when you give more details about the variable, I always recommend you can paste the entire question so that whatever was in the physical questionnaire is also what is reflected on your database. So you can say relationship to contributor. In terms of grouping, the first one is self, family member, and friend. So I'll say self. 2 is family member. And lastly, friend. We'll add and click OK. So, like I said, if you notice these questions are the one somebody is only tied to choose one among the option provided. And this question, we refer to them as single select. I wish to stop there, but tomorrow we will proceed with section B. And if you look at the question, these are questions whereby somebody has more than one option. So it means you can select radio, TV, and even newspaper, and you're just the same person. So review this questionnaire between now and tomorrow so that you will be in the same page with me with what I'm talking about. Same applies to the rest of these questionnaires. I may not be able to interact with all of them, but for you as my student, it will be a good idea for you to understand or to interact with as many questions and questionnaires as possible. I'm not going to show you how to save this work because tomorrow the first thing I want us to do is now developing this database so that we pick there and continue from section B. Let me take question if there's any.